From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro has addressed the crowds marching in Caracas in support of the country's sovereignty. President Maduro denounced what he called the opposition's provocations on the border, and he also broke off diplomatic ties with the government of Colombia.
I cannot continue. I cannot continue withstanding this. We cannot continue withstanding the territory of Colombia is given for an attack against Colombia. That's why I've decided to break all political and diplomatic relationships with the fascist government of Colombia and all their ambassadors and all the consuls who must leave in 24 hours time of Venezuela. Out of here, oligarchy. Out of here. Get out of here. Enough is enough.
Maduro also reminded his supporters that it's the people who rule Venezuela and not international forces. He said he's committed to the constitution of his country.
For you, I hold these reins, and I will continue to hold them in my hands. Based on this constitution, governing in a democratic, free and constitutional way our country for the welfare of the majority in our country, for the working people. That's my supreme commitment. And why am I here? Because you are the ones who decide in Venezuela. In Venezuela, it's not Donald Trump and the gringo imperialists who decide. In Venezuela, it's not Ivan Duque or the Colombian oligarchy that decides. In Venezuela, it's the sovereign people who decide.
Maduro also asked the opposition how long they will keep up these sanctions that are hurting the people of Venezuela.
And I ask the opposition minority who have taken the path of a coup d'etat and are calling for imperialist intervention. I ask them, until when will you damage our country? How long will you invent these games to destabilize and damage our country? I ask you, what have you achieved in 20 years of conspiracies? What have you achieved in these last 30 days of the phantom president? What have you achieved? I ask, after 30 days, why didn't you call presidential elections if you supposedly had power? Those elections of yours should be today, if you had any power.
Maduro was speaking to a demonstration in support of the Bolivarian Revolution, which started this Monday. They demanded respect for Venezuela's sovereignty and condemned the attempts to intervene in the country. They said they will defend the gains of the last 2 decades.
I'm a member of the People's Militia and a teacher at the Bolivarian University, and what we want is to defend our revolution and the changes that this country has seen, which have been absolutely fundamental for the last 20 years.
And all this comes as the Venezuelan opposition and its international allies began their promised operation to force so-called humanitarian aid across the border from Colombia. Near the town of Ureña, a truck with USAID boxes has been set ablaze as part of a false flag operation. Our correspondent Madeline Garcia is there now.
We are witnessing a false flag scenario. People who were on the Colombian side were promoted by José Manuel Olivares, who is a lawmaker who is on the run. In the early morning hours, he was there on the bridge organizing terroristic actions and vandalism, along with Dilcar Fernandez. They attempted to cross a bus into Venezuelan territory, but then they burned this bus right in the center of the bridge, but still on the Colombian side, in order to blame the Bolivarian National Guard of Venezuela. It's a new false flag which is being denounced from here in Venezuela. During the morning hours, we saw that the first action, which had 3 military servicemen in armored vehicles, threw people who were there attempting to cross into Venezuela, as usual, who didn't know of the border closure. And they are now trying to hold the Venezuelan National Guard responsible for the burning of this bus in Colombian territory. That's what's developing here in San Antonio de Táchira, as acts of violence continue in Ureña and at the Simón Bolívar International Bridge on the other side. We are located in the center of Ureña and the Simón Bolívar Bridge.
The International Red Cross said it has learned that people not affiliated with the organization have been seen wearing the Red Cross emblem at the Colombia-Venezuela border and the Brazil-Venezuela border. This is footage from the scene of the fire at the Santander Bridge in Ureña. At least 2 different individuals were seen what looks like the Red Cross emblem. In a tweet, the organization urged them to stop and say this act jeopardizes the neutrality and impartiality of the Red Cross. And Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza pointed out that the International Red Cross and UN agencies are not participating in the border show. He tweeted that there is a simple reason for this, quote, "It is obviously an action with political objectives and could never be described as a humanitarian action." And just 2 small truckloads of aid remain on the Brazilian side of the border as of 4 p.m. local time. Things have been relatively calm, not though normal, in the Brazilian border town of Paracayama and the Venezuelan town of Santa Elena de Uairén. The day in Paracayama began with a press conference held by the Foreign Minister of Brazil and representatives of the United States and the opposition. They said they will attempt to enter into Venezuela with 200 tons of food and medicine. Our correspondent Andrés Vieira is there and sent this report.
We are here on the Brazilian border with Venezuela, on the Brazilian side, and where you can see those 2 vehicles, that is Venezuela. So far, it is just those 2 pickups that have arrived here, as the Brazilian Foreign Ministry announced earlier in a news conference with representatives of the United States and of the Venezuelan opposition lawmaker, Juan Guaidó. So far, no aid lorry has crossed the border into Venezuela. The situation here is calm. The Brazilian army is on one side, the Venezuelan army is on the other side, and everything is peaceful. We will be here keeping you up to date.
We thank André for that report. Demonstrations against intervention in Venezuela have been taking place around the world. In London, protesters condemned interference pushed by the U.S. government, describing the action as despicable. The demonstration took place outside the Bank of England, which is refusing to hand over more than $1 billion worth of Venezuela's gold reserves. The former mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, was at the protest.
Because all my life, America's governments have tried to overthrow regimes they don't like. And whilst American governments say, oh, we're defending democracy, no. Almost all those governments have been democratically elected or have come to power overthrowing an evil right-wing dictatorship. America's interventions are just so they can continue to extract the wealth of that nation. Demonstrations like this are about the only way to get the truth across to people. All I read in the papers about Venezuela, they depict it as a disaster. You never see them talking about the elimination of poverty, creating the ability for every kid to go to school and learn to read, getting rid of all the inequalities that were there. Chavez transformed his nation.
The president of Cuba has tweeted his support for the Venezuelan people and the government of Nicolás Maduro. With the hashtag #HandsOffVenezuela, Miguel Díaz-Canel says, enough of false pretexts to conceal sinister plans. It is the peoples plunged into poverty by imperialist aggression who need humanitarian aid. And support for the government of Venezuela is also being shown in Chile. Demonstrators gathered outside the Venezuelan embassy in Santiago. They held a big banner that read, "Peace in Venezuela." In France, there was a show of solidarity during Saturday's Yellow Vest demonstrations. They denounced U.S. intervention in Venezuela and showed support for the Venezuelan people's fight for sovereignty. Also in Sydney, Australia, protesters braved bad weather to support the growing Hands Off Venezuela movement. Under umbrellas, they held signs calling on the international community to stop Donald Trump's push for war in Venezuela. Others called for an end to economic blockade against Venezuela. And in New York City, Hands Off Venezuela protesters demonstrated in Zuccotti Park before staging a protest inside Oculus where they chanted "No More War." In Boston, former Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein spoke at the Hands Off Venezuela rally.
It's not easy to stop a war machine as it's revving up to pounce, and we all know that it is, but there's one thing that can stop it. That's us, by saying, hell no, keep your hands off Venezuela. Before this is over, we're going to need to stand up, we're going to need to sit in, we're going to need to lock down, we're going to need to do what it takes in order to stop this empire from crushing half the world around us and more.
Now to Cuba. Just a day before the constitutional referendum vote, our correspondent in Havana, Luis Autier, has the latest on the preparations.
Yes, good afternoon. Indeed, Cuba is only less than 24 hours away from one of its most important social and political moments of the last 40 years, the constitutional referendum that will be taking place tomorrow. Apparently, the yes is going to win, but we will have to wait till Monday, 4 p.m. when the National Electoral Commission will give our press release informing that decision of if it was ratified or not the new constitution. Yesterday, the Cuban troubadour Silvio Rodriguez offered a concert dedicated to this important process, and today La Colmenita, which is an artistic group only conformed by kids, by children, will offer a show with the same purpose. But this is not everything that people are focused these days. Cuban people is really focused and interest and will be there have been given follow to the situations in Venezuela. And yesterday, the Cuban Institute for the Friendship with the People offered over 3 million signatures to the Venezuelan embassy to show their support to the cause that they are living right now. It's a really dedicated situation there. This is pretty much what we have right now. I'm back to you.
We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. Thousands of people in Mexico have marched to denounce the murder of environmental activist Samir Flores, who was gunned down on Wednesday. The demonstrators held banners that read, "Samir didn't die, the government killed him," to call for justice for the activists. They also demanded that 2 thermoelectric plants and pipeline project that Samir opposed to be cancelled. The activists denounced the projects, saying they will contaminate drinking water in the state of Morelos. Thousands of Brazilian workers gathered outside Sao Paulo's City Hall following 2 weeks of a strike. The demonstrators resolved to continue the strike and join a nationwide strike against the pension reform proposed by President Jair Bolsonaro.
On February 22nd in Sao Paulo, tens of thousands of striking municipal government workers gathered in front of City Hall for a public assembly to vote on whether their 2-week-long strike, which has closed 70% of the city's public schools, would continue.
We are striking here in front of Sao Paulo City Hall, and I'm sure that we are going to vote to maintain the strike today, because we met with Mayor Bruno Covas today, and he didn't give us any answers at all. He's eliminating the right to strike and won't reverse the workers' salary cuts.
Mayor Bruno Covas raised pension deductions for city workers from 11% to 14% and turned their pension fund management over to a private company. When the workers announced their strike on February 4th, he threatened to sue the unions. During the assembly, the workers voted to continue the strike, and they also voted to join a nationwide strike against President Jair Bolsonaro's neoliberal pension reforms.
I am here defending women because they want to raise our retirement age to 65. And we don't accept this. In the old days, slaves were freed when they turned 60, but with the new reforms, we'll have to work until we die. I don't accept this, and I don't accept that they are lowering my salary. We are going to continue fighting.
After the assembly was over, the workers marched for 5 kilometers through downtown in the rain, shutting down rush hour traffic, and they promised to do it again next week if their demands are not met. Brian Muir, Telesur, São Paulo.
19 Spanish-speaking teen girls who were held as sex slaves in Trinidad are now in better health after being rescued by police. The National Security Minister provided an update on the investigation.
Young ladies are getting better in health. Some of them had some health issues, so we had to move very quickly. We were providing the social services side, including, from the psychology point of view. It has been a difficult operation because of that, exactly as you say, the language barrier. So we've also had to get persons in to assist the social workers and the police investigators. So I can tell you there's an active police investigation taking place. There's a completion of statements from the girls taking place and the gathering of evidence taking place. I don't want to say more than that because it's an active investigation and I expect the leads to be pursued. But the girls are being well looked after, and I'm very thankful to the Ministry of Social Development for that.
English rock legend Roger Waters has sent a message to the Venezuelan people against U.S. intervention.
Good morning. My name's Roger Waters. I'm in Europe. Today is a day of action. It's the 23rd of February 2019. There is a story here. It's about Venezuela. In 1998, after the Venezuelan people democratically elected a socialist government, the government nationalized the oil industry. That is maybe where this story starts. This did not go down well in the corridors of power. So 4 years later, aided and abetted by the US government, there was an attempted coup to remove Hugo Chavez, who was the president of the country then. The coup failed. It lasted bare 2 days. There was an enormous uprising of protest from the people of Venezuela in the streets who demanded the return of their president. So he was reinstated after 2 days. All right. That was in 2002. So what to do next? Well, what the United States did was they first Obama declared that Venezuela was a strategic threat to the United States, and they imposed economic sanctions and a blockade through banking systems of the country. 16 years later, those illegal and draconian sanctions have borne the fruit that the US required them to bear. They wanted to foment dissent in the country by destroying the economy and by encouraging inflation. And they have achieved that. And there is dissent, without question, in Venezuela. People are leaving Venezuela. Life is hard in Venezuela, particularly for poor people. It's mainly because of the inflation. It's a lie that there's no food. That's just wrong. There's tons of food, but it's too expensive for people to buy. So they're having another go at a coup right now. They groomed a puppet. His name's Guaido, something like that. And they've been grooming him for 10 years. This is very well documented. So now he is meeting with his puppet masters who are on the other end of a bridge in the neighboring country of Colombia, with a big line of C-130 American military transport planes, pretending that they are coming as saviors to save Venezuela from a crisis created by the current government. This is absolute nonsense, of course. It is an absolute charade in order for them to achieve what they tried to achieve in 2002 and failed, regime change. Because That government back in 1998 did something unthinkable to an American administration. It took the revenue from the oil industry and distributed it to all the Venezuelan people in social programs, even the poor people. Horror, horror, horror. Giving money to poor people? Why? Anyway, I'm not digressing because this is the main thrust of why I'm speaking to you today. But I'm running out of time. I'm told I have to get on with it, so I will get on with it. I have a message for the puppet and for his masters from Washington, D.C. Hands off Venezuela. What you are doing is immoral and illegal. We support you, people of Venezuela, millions of us, all over the world, millions, despite what you might read in the newspapers. We love you. We wish you well. History will probably show that socialism in Venezuela was a light shining for the way we should possibly organize politics in the rest of the world. All right, so we're with you.
More news in a minute. Stay with us.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus...
Welcome back. Votes are now being counted in Nigeria's president election. Election day there has generally been described as peaceful despite an attack in the country's north. But the vote, which is widely seen as too close to call, was marred by hours-long delays at polling stations across the country. Voting has now closed in many areas, but some were kept open later due to those issues. Meanwhile, security forces say they repel a plan by Boko Haram to disrupt the elections. Thousands of internally displaced people in Nigeria defied the early Saturday morning explosion scare in Maiduguri and came out to cast their votes in the presidential election. There was a large turnout at polling stations where refugees displaced by Boko Haram were casting their votes. A series of explosions were heard in the city of Maiduguri just hours before polls opened. The military assured residents of their safety. Meanwhile, the country's electoral commission extended voting hours in some areas, including the capital, Abuja. The electoral commission chairperson said the delays were due to a number of challenges, including the late arrival of electoral officials.
I'm not happy with the delay. As they say, we're supposed to vote early because around 2, they will close everything. So after that, they don't start anything, so I'm not happy.
Polling booths, they say about 20,000 registered voters. And if about 20,000 registered voters, and by this time they have not started, if you can check the number, even by the crowd outside, if there's at least up to 50 or 60% turnout, it will be difficult to finish in a day. I don't foresee them I don't see everybody that is here voting within the stipulated time.
And the Nigerian Electoral Commission has postponed elections in the Boni local government area in the country's southwest after voting failed to take off due to violence. The commission said elections will be held on a date to be announced later. Security forces used tear gas to disperse supporters of the ruling APC who blocked voting materials and officials from leaving their electoral commission's offices. The supporters claim the material deployed to the region were fake. Polling centers and voters in Dakar are preparing for Senegal's presidential election on Sunday. Much of the electoral material was delivered to polling stations on Friday evening. Voters will be choosing from 5 candidates, including current President Macky Sall, who is hoping to win a second mandate. And with this story, we come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories in our website at telsurenglish.net. And don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.